These are where I keep my recipes. I just have them on post-it notes up here. Baguette, you can see 1 cup water to 2.5 cups flour, 1.5 teaspoon yeast, 1 tablespoon sugar, 1 teaspoon salt. We'll go through each of these steps in a minute. I'm actually making 4 baguettes instead of 2. This recipe yields 2 baguettes. So I'll be doubling all of the ingredients. Over here, you can see I'm going to use this whole wheat flour, Imperial. There's actually a better one, a stone ground wheat that you can get at Tops. I recommend that. I'm using White Swan bread flour. This is the important part, the bread, because that's what gives the gluten properties and that really nice crunchy crust. So, alright. Used most of the bread flour and all of the wheat flour. This is the wheat flour on the top here. I'll be mixing the dry ingredients together first. So I've got the tablespoon. I've got the tablespoon here. It's normally 1 tablespoon of sugar, but because I'm doubling the recipe, it'll be 2. Got the 2 tablespoons of sugar in there, and then 2 teaspoons of salt. Some people don't like to add the salt at the start, but because of the way that I mix the dry ingredients, I do. Actually, we're just going to add all of this because I already measured it out. That's the salt. And then next up is 1.5 teaspoons normally of dry yeast. Now this yeast is instant dry yeast. When you go to the store, make sure that you check the expiry date, because you don't want to buy expired yeast, and even if it's not expired, this still can go bad early. This was the problem when I first started baking bread, it was the yeast. That's why if your bread doesn't rise, if your bread seems flat and kind of tasteless, it's because the yeast was not correct. This is what the yeast looks like. I've added 2 teaspoons already, just adding the 3rd. And that's all the ingredients. Got the sugar, salt, the yeast, and the flour. And then I just like to do a quick whisking of all the ingredients together to make sure that they're super mixed in. I've found that with instant dry yeast, which is what I use, that if you pre-mix the dry ingredients like this and make sure that it's all evenly distributed, the yeast will develop more quickly and you won't get any weirdness with like patches where it seems like nothing's going on, or that dull flat taste that can sometimes happen if the yeast is too weak or mostly dead. Either of which are bad situations to begin with, but this helps mitigate some of that because a lot of yeast does go bad in Thailand simply because of the heat, especially lately, which is why I've been avoiding making bread. Alright, I've mixed these pretty good, so next step is to add water and then I'll start kneading, at which point I'll try to get a video of that. Important thing to note, well, first of all, for the water, I've got it set to ambient, not cold. You want basically warm water for this. Not hot, but warm, so that the yeast doesn't get scalded. And then the second thing of note is your salt. Do not use salt with iodine in it. The iodine will kill the yeast. So if you're making bread and you've seen it go flat and it didn't work, in addition to the yeast, making sure that's good, make sure that you use either sea salt or rock salt, but the important thing is this right here. This salt does not supply iodine. Iodide. You don't want iodine in your salt, because it will wreck things. Alright. So you can see I've got gloves on for handling the dough, mainly because this might end up being for public consumption. First thing you want to do is just sort of move the flour around to get the water to go into it. And then once you've incorporated that as much as it will go easily, you're going to have to start kneading, which looks a bit like this. So you can see I'm sort of pushing the dough into itself. That's sort of the kneading process. You're folding it over into itself to get everything evenly distributed, and then kind of smashing it down. Since I'm doing this in I don't have a good floured flat surface for this. That would be ideal if I had like a large stone table. The way that you would clean that would be you'd pour boiling water over the top of it. I mean, be careful in that situation, but you get the idea. And that'll kill all the bacteria and stuff, and then you can dry it, and then put flour on top, and you can knead on that surface. In this case, I do all my kneading inside of bowls, both because it's, I don't know, there's less cleaning involved, that's for sure. Periodically you want to scrape the sides to get the flour and bits of dough incorporated into the dough. So you can see it's already sort of becoming a dough-like substance structure. The wheat is giving it more of that kind of weird texture that you might not be used to in dough. But it's going to take about 10 minutes of kneading to get to where it should be. So I'm going to skip to that. So kneaded the dough for about 10 minutes. You can see it's not perfectly smooth. It would be smooth if I were doing non-wheat bread, and I'd be adding a little bit more flour as well on the surface, and then you would see it smooth out into like a perfectly smooth ball. But in the case of using wheat bread, you're going to get a more tacky surface like this one. That's perfectly okay, and it doesn't really matter how pretty it looks right now because it's all going to explode in the next period, which we call proofing. So it's just going to sit up on the shelf. So I'm going to cover this up with some plastic wrap. You can get this cling film at Macro. This particular one, which is, I had a different one before that was not quite as sticky, and yeah, it didn't work very well. This one's very big, proper cling wrap. You just want to make sure that it's completely covered. And some people punch holes in it, but I don't. It really doesn't need that much air. And everything it's got is in there. So I'm going to put this up here on top of another thing called the couche. And it's just going to sit on top of my fridge, completely covered, until for 30 minutes typically, or sometimes I'll let it go for an hour because I find that it has a better taste, and with the wheat it needs a little bit more time because the wheat is heavy and the yeast needs a little bit more time to deal with it, I think. Or at least that's been my experience so far. So it's been 45 minutes, or maybe an hour, and you can see that the bread has expanded quite a bit, the dough, and now we're going to roll it out and you want well-floured surfaces for this next part because otherwise shit gets everywhere. So you can see that the dough has risen quite a bit. We're just going to pull this out of here. Actually, I'm going to flour this as well to make it a little bit easier to handle. At this point on, flour is your friend for dealing with this bread. So what I'm doing is I'm sort of pushing down to scoop it out in one big ball. Now, if you wanted to, you could do like a bloomer loaf. So it's kind of like that. But most people like the baguettes a little bit more, so I'm going to go for that. So it should be about 4 pieces, just sort of measuring it out. Oh, that's right. Here it is. Let's spread this out. Now we're going to work out the dough into a rectangle. Now you don't want to go overzealous with the flour like I did. It's actually a pain in the ass to kind of brush it off. But either way, once you get it to about like that, about 6 to 8 inches, or 6 inches this way and about 8 inches that way. Now we're just going to roll it up. There's definitely too much flour, but oh well. When you get to the end here, you want to smash that edge together. Smash it real good. Smooth it out. Make sure it's fairly even. and that's basically your baguette already. Next up, see, I have such a terrible working area. Just want to make sure that this is super well floured, especially along the edges, because the next thing you do is you're going to put the baguette in there. And this one's going on the very edge, but we're going to have room for 4. So, make sure the bread is split out, and then we're just going to take these and sort of do a little pattern. Now these pepperonis have peppers in them, hence the name pepperoni, which generally doesn't go good in bread, but I think that because it is because it's part of the pepperoni, I think that it's not going to be too bad. Just spread it out. There we go. And now we're going to roll it up. This will be interesting. Now I should have left a little bit more room at the edge there on the seam. Ah, this is too much flour. Shit. Well, that wasn't too much different from rolling up any of the other bread, so I think it'll be fine. Won't really know until it's cooked and I can see what it's actually done. That's just way too much flour. Alright. You might be wondering where I got this cloth. It's not cloth, actually. It's I believe it's cheese bread, or sorry, cheesecloth. And it's I found it at a store. Just it's sitting there. Alright, so I'm not sure if I want to experiment with the last one too. I do have goat's cheese, and I was thinking about putting goat's cheese in there. So I'm going to do that. Because if you can't experiment, what's the fucking point? What's the fucking point? The other thing I was going to try was bacon, but I need to cook the bacon before I put it into the bread, otherwise it's no good. No bueno. Goat's cheese. I think I'll do 2 strips. This is an experiment, so I have no idea if this is going to be any good or not. Again, don't try this at home. In this case, though, I'm going to smash down the goat's cheese to sort of incorporate it into the dough, just so it's not going all over the place. Which is what it clearly wants to do. Alright. Again, easy stuff. No muss, no fuss. Sealed. There we go. Make sure that seam is nice nice and tight. Okay, this one's a little awkward too. All right. Okay. I'm putting flour on the top of them because I'm going to put the other piece on top. Give you a look. So that's what they look like. This is a technical term. It's called a couche. I don't know what the hell that means. I haven't looked it up yet. But it's basically just a cloth or something that you put flour on top of so that you can let the bread rest inside it. This one's a little thinner than I would like, so I might put a piece of plastic wrap on top of this. But otherwise, it's just a place for the bread to proof one more time. So this is going to proof for another 45 minutes. As you can see in the recipe. Well, it says 40 minutes, but whatever. So what I'll do is I'm going to set a timer for 30 minutes, and then I'm going to come down when there's 10 minutes left to turn on the oven to score the bread and to get everything ready to put in there and cook. As you can tell, the baguettes have increased in size, and this is where we're going to do some additional fun stuff. Since two of these have stuff inside them and I've never done it before, I'm not going to decorate them, but normally I'll put sesame seeds on the normal baguettes. But first, this is a useful tool. It's a brush. So first I'm just going to sort of lightly brush off the extra flour, just because there's too much. Most of it's settled in. Stuff inside has probably settled in. Also, these things are, yeah, you can see there that they've kind of pushed together. Despite my best efforts, this couche is not big enough for this many pieces of bread. So we're going to move them over to some silica parchment paper that I have. I just started getting this recently, the silica parchment. You can find it at Tops. I highly recommend it. Let me see if I can set up the camera. And now we're going to have to fucking separate the bread. So very lightly, you don't want to push the air out of them, because that would be bad. Now that I'm thinking about it, actually, I probably want them to go this way. Now they're laying on on my cutting board. Oh, there's not enough room. I'm just going to kind of push this guy together a little bit so it stays on my cutting board. Clearly the bread's not quite the right size, but that's fine. This is the pepperoni one. Sometimes they'll get stuck to the bottom of the couche as well. That means that there is too much moisture in the bread. So in the case of the pepperoni one, I can feel that there's air around the pepperoni in there. That's interesting. And it looks like these two kind of touched, so I'm kind of prying them apart very gently. Because again, you do not want to push the air out. That air in the bread is what gives it that nice texture, and also, ooh, this one's huge. Alright, that's trouble. This one's trouble. This has also got a lot of flour caked on it. Okay. This one, unfortunately, is going to lose some of its gas right now, because it just doesn't fit here. Alright. These two are the non-special ones, so what I'm going to do is get some water. Warm water. And we're just going to give them a nice coating of that because I'm going to decorate them with sesame seeds before I do the scoring, which I had mentioned before. This one's literally falling off the edge here. That's going to be a trouble when I try to get it in the oven. So, just a normal razor blade, you can buy this in any store. Extend it out pretty far, and ideally I can get to the whatever's inside, but it doesn't look like that's happening. The scoring should be about 2 inches apart. That's not quite right. No. It's just a quick motion. Not really a big deal. But this will make it so that when the bread is cooking, it rises up this way, as opposed to any other direction. Undesirable directions. This is sesame seed. Since I've wetted down the bread, it's going to accept them pretty easily. I like to, whoops, do it this way. It doesn't matter how much you get on there because it's just not really that important. Now I score them. And because I'm scoring them after I've applied the sesame seed, you'll see that it'll give a cooler pattern. There won't be any sesame seeds inside the scoring pattern. So the bread's outside, ready to be put into the oven. This is a pan of hot water, which I'm going to put into the oven first. And the importance of that is it creates a lot of steam in the oven, and the steam is what allows the bread to get that nice hard crust on it. As you can see, they're pretty well done. You can kind of see the pepperoni in this one a little bit. I should have scored it a little bit better. It should all look kind of like that. Just a hot tip, if you want to check if a bread is done. Jeez, this is hard to show. Do you hear that? That's the sound, the hollow sound that you want to hear. If it doesn't make that sound, it probably needs more time. Got the bread in the kitchen now. Just so you know, you can brush this off. That's another good use of the brush. You're supposed to wait 15 minutes, but I just want to. You're supposed to wait 15 minutes to cut them open, but I'm going to do it right now because I really want to see what's going on in the pepperoni bread and the cheese bread. This is a bread knife. It's serrated. You need this if you're going to cut thick, crusty bread like this. This is the cheese bread, so let me cut it right around the midpoint. You can hear that crust. There you can see some of the cheese in the bottom there, in the bottom corner. You can give it a try. Oh yeah, it smells good. There's more of the cheese. Oh yeah, that's really good. I don't know if you can hear it, but that crust, it's really nice. Alright, now the pepperoni. Oh, that's quite nice too. You can see the pepperoni is mixed in there. The bread didn't suffer for it. It made these little pockets for it where you get the oil. Let's give it a taste. Oh yeah.
That's really good. I'm honestly surprised. So I do recommend what I showed you earlier, wrapping them. Alright. Hope you enjoyed the tutorial.